great. So our next presentation is actually a conversation. Ruma Bose, who's an entrepreneur, author, and philanthropist, is going to be interviewing Matthew Bishop. For those of you that don't know Matthew Bishop, Matthew is the U.S. business editor and New York bureau chief of The Economist, and they're going to be having a conversation about the coming boom in impact investing and what that means for urban entrepreneurs. Please welcome them.
Good morning, everyone. It's great to hear a great crowd. I'm Ruma Bose, and today's topic is Innovating for Good and the Coming Boom of Impact Investing. Sitting with me today is Matthew Bishop, who is, as you heard, the New York bureau chief of The Economist and the global business editor. He's also the author of Philanthrocapitalism, which Bill Clinton and Michael Bloomberg have also hailed as their favorite book. And he is most recently on the G8 Task Force for Impact Investing, which was set up by the G8 countries to see how they can build, grow, and catalyze a market for impact investing globally. So before we start, just to kick off, I'd love to see from the audience, how many of you, raise your hands, how many of you call yourselves social entrepreneurs? Great. And how many of you call yourselves just entrepreneurs? Bigger crowd. And how many of you think there's a difference between the two? Great. How many of you have heard of impact investing? All right. And how many of you are impact investors? So a lot fewer. So Matthew, I'm going to turn to you and ask you, what do you make of the audience response, and why should they care about impact investing?
Well, good morning, everyone. It's great to be here, and I think the response tells me that a lot more of you need to be looking at impact investing and social innovation as an area where you can really make a difference and make a lot of money over the next few years. I think that as I talk and interview a lot of venture capitalists nowadays, I get the sense that they feel there is an overabundant supply of very similar deals in the social space, and there's a complete lack of good deals in the social good space. There's a lot of money out there that is looking to find projects to invest in where they can not just get financial risk and financial return, but also some kind of social impact at the end of it. And what this task force that I'm on, the mission really is basically to impact investing, this third lens, risk, reward, impact, what happened to venture capital over the last 40 years. If you go back 40 years, venture capital was a tiny industry. Now it's absolutely the brains of capitalism. Impact investing, the aspiration is to do pretty much the same over the next 20 years. We think that potentially there's $1 trillion of investment that's going to come to the market over the next decade or so. And as I say, the people in that industry at the moment, the biggest constraint that they have is the lack of good deals to invest in.
And I'm going to ask you, how would they define a good deal? But before I do that, I think it would be very helpful for the audience if you could please just define what is an impact investor, what is a social entrepreneur, so that there's clarity. We hear a lot of buzzwords, we read a lot of different things. So if you can just clarify and define for us, I think it would be very helpful.
So a social entrepreneur, the idea kind of grew up over the last 25 years. It was initially a non-profit person who tried to bring lessons from the business world to the social area, like how do you deal with homelessness or providing healthcare in poor countries or water supply or education. Increasingly, it's now a for-profit entrepreneur that's looking at those areas. And the underlying theory behind that is that the really hard problems that have got to be solved over the next 10 or 20 years are those problems in the social areas. And if you can solve those problems, there is a lot of money to be made. So if you are in a slum in the developing world, and we're talking about cities here a lot today, I mean, the big economic engine for the developing world over the next 10 years, next 20 years, is the emergence of cities, mega cities, with maybe half the population of the world is going to move from rural to city over the next 25 years. How do you provide education to all these aspirational people who want their kids to learn English and to be able to get a job in the tech industry or whatever? They are willing to pay already significant amounts of money for that education. Their governments are useless, basically, so they're not going to be providing the answers. If you are in a slum, the chances are you are not going to have the traditional approach to sanitation that we are all used to in the rich world. They're going to have to find new solutions to that water supply issue, the issue of how you design getting rid of waste and keeping health in those areas. So all the really hard problems, the really interesting problems, are also where the money is going to be made. And if you're just doing another Me Too social app, the chances are you're going to be wasting your time, you won't make any money. If you can actually solve those big problems, you really could be the next Bill Gates or Steve Jobs.
Okay, so thank you very much for that clarification. You mentioned something very interesting. You said that there's $1 trillion looking for adequate deal flow around this whole impact investing. Can you give us an example of a success story and tell us what does a good deal look like?
Okay, there's not $1 trillion. What there is at the moment is the potential for a lot of money to move into this area. If you ask increasingly mainstream investment institutions, they will say that ideally they are under growing pressure to look at investments not just in terms of risk and reward, but in terms of their consequences for the environment and for society as a whole. Particularly since the crash in 2008, there's growing pressure on investment institutions. That pressure is only going to grow over time, particularly as we all become much more active in demanding to know how our money is being invested. So you look at Stanford University is pulling out of investing in coal, for example, coal companies, because of pressure from the alumni network and so forth at Stanford. That is going to grow and grow and grow. And so if you can appeal to those investors, there will be money starting to become more and more available. Now, the success stories already, I mean, I guess one of the first impact funds is called DBL, Double Bottom Line Investors, out of California, and they invested in companies like Tesla and Solar City, which have both IPO'd spectacularly and made a lot of money for the investors, so they're raising another bigger fund. One of my favorite companies in England, which is much smaller, is called Our Organization Makes People Happy, or OOMPH. And basically what that is doing is recognizing one of the big challenges of the next 20 years in the rich world is going to be aging populations. And what they're doing is going into care homes, and they're teaching all sorts of innovative fitness techniques for old people. And they are, one of their metrics as social impact is to reduce the number of people falling over, having falls in healthcare homes. And they've reduced, so far in the healthcare homes they're operating in, they're reducing by 25% the accident rate of people who are falling over because they're unfit. That's just the tip of the iceberg. You think of all these baby boomers that are going to retire and move into residential accommodation over this. Very few entrepreneurs looking at that area at the moment. Massive opportunity, particularly when you start to recognize that the basic technology can help monitor the health of older people and all that quantitative self stuff that's coming out. Very few people focusing on the older people because everyone looks at teenagers and millennials because that's who they are largely, who are doing the innovating. But look at your grandparents and think what they're doing and how your technology know-how could really help them.
Interesting. Well, I'd like for you to clarify a confusion that I have based on a lot of things that I've read, which is traditionally, startups and entrepreneurs and the do-good world have been very separate. Why should each of those worlds care about each other? I think that as an entrepreneur, I historically looked at the do-good world and thought, oh, well, that's very easy, and you lead from a place of passion and love. And so how do you reconcile the two and really create a profitable entity, bringing those two worlds together?
Right, so the first thing I want to say is that impact investing is not primarily about philanthropy. I think that's a common misunderstanding. So I asked Mark Andreessen, what do you think about impact investing? He said, ask my wife, she's the philanthropist. Okay, that's a kind of fairly common misconception. If you're Mark Andreessen, you can afford to say that as a venture capitalist because you're getting the best deals in the world coming in front of you. Actually, I think impact investing recognizes that to really achieve scale, you need to harness the profit motive and the capital markets that are out there. They're much bigger than philanthropy. And so if you really want to solve these big problems I'm talking about, you need to be able to harness the for-profit markets. It also recognizes that a lot of these problems are more complicated because they involve some kind of interaction with government, some interaction with a lot more issues around trust and dealing with people who are in some sense feeling like they're victims or neglected by the mainstream. And so they require a lot more emotional intelligence than has typically been required to succeed in a startup, particularly in Silicon Valley, where, I mean, the famous myths of social intelligence and the lack of it in Silicon Valley are legion. And so it's a whole new skill set, which is why we're seeing the shift to New York with some of the social media developments, where you're getting people who understand how women work, for example, which is not something Silicon Valley has been great at in the past. We're going to see that further evolution into the areas of people who feel marginalized, neglected, and so forth. And this is where, I wrote about your book in The Economist. Your book, Mother Teresa CEO, is looking at Mother Teresa not as a saint, but as perhaps one of the greatest entrepreneurs of all time, who took a startup to be $1 billion multinational. And basically, I wrote that in an article where I looked at the branding also of Lady Gaga, one of the most successful people who branded by identifying with victimhood amongst teenagers, the little monster complex. And Mother Teresa's understanding of brand and her control of her brand is something no one ever thinks about, but actually, as you highlight in your book, was absolutely brilliant. All those lessons from the best non-profits need to be embraced by businesses. This is why business is more and more trying to understand mission. It's trying to understand what is it that builds trust. How do you develop that over the long term? How do you get consumers to engage with you and do stuff that maybe they wouldn't be willing to do if they just regarded you as a flagrant capitalist out there to rip them off. So all that stuff has to be learned by the startup, and it is much more difficult. And I think you can learn a lot from non-profits. One of my favorite examples, again, is Warby Parker. Warby Parker is this very cool online spectacle glasses maker. One of the founders there, Neil Blumenthal, he spent a lot of time working for Vision Spring, which is a non-profit that gives glasses away in the developing world. He became convinced, went off, got an MBA, that basically fashionable glasses were hugely overpriced in America. So he decided he was going to disrupt that market by finding a cheap way to produce fashionable glasses, and at the same time incorporate that in that a buy one, give one away model, whereby if you bought a pair of glasses, they would also be giving away a pair in the developing world through Vision Spring, this non-profit that he'd worked with. And Vision Spring helped deliver the glasses in a way that was socially effective. They reckon they've now given away 1 million pairs of glasses, which has had an economic impact of at least $200 million. I think probably much more than that, when you think about the impact of being able to read and see properly on ordinary people in the developing world. That kind of thinking is more complex. It's not just sitting there in a room with a few mates doing an app. It's actually getting out there and engaging with real people and hearing what their problems are, and maybe dealing with people in the non-profit sector who you wouldn't particularly have respected in the past. But it is worth doing, I think.
Okay, so that's a great example. Let's say, for instance, somebody in this room gets inspired by your talk and says, I want to try to embed a social mission into my company and see how I can go make a difference and raise some capital. What are some of the tools, resources, legal structures, ecosystems? What advice would you give them? And
well, I think that one of the big innovations that is going to help grow this whole impact investing space is the B Corp movement. So if you don't know about this movement, you should find out about it. B Corps it's a kind of certification for a startup or a company that says, we have a social mission beyond just making money. We're about making money, but we want to be also about achieving social impact. So far, there are probably a couple of thousand B Corps in America. It's now in 30 countries. I think there are at least 50 here in Canada. And it's basically starting to grow very, very rapidly. Some well-known examples are Warby Parker, Etsy, the online marketplace that's probably going to IPO quite soon. I guess there's Revolution Food, which just got a $30 million investment from Steve Case, which is about providing healthy food at school lunches in public schools in America. A whole load of new examples every day. And what this does, there's a little bit of extra energy and time has to go into measuring your impact on various ways, but actually the overall advantage of it is it allows you to be very clear about the values of your organization, about what your motivation is, where you're heading, what you want to be known for in the long run. And I find that when I talk to entrepreneurs who start B Corps, they say, actually, this was a very healthy conversation to have with my colleagues at the start. We actually figured out that we bonded more because we understood we weren't just about making money, we were about making money, doing well, and doing good at the same time. And actually, it's been very helpful in helping them navigate difficult decisions along the way. How far do we pivot in one direction or another if things change? What things do we rule out? What things do we keep doing? And if you go to B Lab, you can get a lot of information about B Corps. And I think that we will see, within a couple of years, existing public companies start to switch to B Corps. If you are a company already, you can use a lot of the measurement technology they have called gears to actually assess how your company would fare on a number of indicators that tell you whether you're an impact company or not, without having to go the whole way. So I think that's a very, very big movement that's about to take off.
Interesting. And it is available in Canada.
Yeah.
So in the interest of time, as a last question, I'd like you to share a personal challenge to the audience with regards to impact investing and what we've discussed today.
Well, I think the challenge I would put to all of you is, if you're in a startup, sit down and have that B Corp conversation. Ask yourselves, sit the whole office down and spend a day just brainstorming, like, what is our social purpose? Is there something that we are doing here that underlying that is about solving or has the potential to solve one of the big social challenges of the next 25 years. And as I say, I think the city, the movement to the city is one of them, and the aging population is another very obvious area. Those two areas alone. Why don't you ask yourself if your app could have any, or your organization could have any impact in those areas, and look at whether you would feel as an organization that being explicit about that would help you to be more effective as an organization, and out of that, I think you will find a lot of inspiration. If you're not in a startup already, I would look at those areas. Look at the big problems where you hear, the baby boomer retirement issue, the whole development of Africa, for example, which again is one of the other big stories that everyone recognizes is going to be a big economic engine over the next 10 or 15 years. If you want to be where the real money is going to be made over the next 10 or 15 years, you want to get into those areas, because that is demographics. That is not a theory about where the world is heading. That is surely where the numbers are, and you want to go where the numbers are going to be in a few years to be ready to welcome all these new customers and all these new people you're going to serve. You don't want to be focusing on the part of the population that is going to be growing out of whatever you're offering them.
So you're telling us to focus on the aging population, the migration from rural to urban, emerging markets, and trying to embed a social mission, because there are hundreds of millions of dollars looking for deal flow.
Yeah.
And as a final, can you help the audience understand what are some of these funds and investors who do invest in this, so they can reach out to them?
Well, the obvious place to start, look at people like Steve Case, look at people like the Omidyar Network, look at the whole, I think you're going to see a lot of the billionaires who have signed the Giving Pledge, which is this pledge to give away half their money. A lot of them are going to be looking at how do they invest that money in the meantime by actually putting it to work as impact investing. So I would expect over the next 2 or 3 years, you will see a lot of action there. You're also going to see a lot of funds that don't call themselves impact funds, but are effectively going to be going after Africa, are going to be going after the emerging city, and they're going to be going after the baby boomer retirement demographic. So, look at investors that are starting to talk about those issues, and particularly when those issues are around outcomes, delivering specific outcomes around aging, around urbanization, around African growth.
Great. Well, I'd like to ask everyone to join me in thanking Matthew Bishop for this interview.
Thank you. And I would say I tweet about these issues at MattBish, so also follow me there, and I can help direct you in the right direction. Thank you.
Great. So our next speaker.